Chairs.
Right. Yeah. We could just make this whole thing go up and down.
These are cool.
Argue about what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, somehow I don't think.
I think it's morning. I just feel like I missed the
I
morning.
think you should ride the bike all the way up the
We had
stairs.
negotiations.
I could.
Bring it into the room.
I can do it.
And I
Gotta
worked
give me a
last
little
night.
bit of space for some speed.
Negotiations
Practice on
on
the stairs. Down's
I
easier.
sat down.
Just like gone in 60 seconds.
What's
You know?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Not quite that good. Camera does some really good jobs with that.
Got out of there just in time to go have lunch and sat there.
They closed the
Probably being
the cafe
delivered
downstairs.
to the dig.
Several months ago.
I had to get up and
Oh,
leave.
really?
Yeah, they could make it go, but
Yeah, they're going back
not enough
now.
traffic.
I'm gonna grab a Coke or something like that.
Just a little side thing.
You have a really awesome job at this.
It is a nice day. I'd agree. Yesterday, over the weekend was very, very nice. Although I'm a little warm.
Take the jacket off. I just thought.
Yeah, I'll tell you, the last.
Let's actually.
Everyone, we're going to call our meeting to order. Thank you for being here on a lovely sunny day. Let's see. First item on the agenda is always the approval of the prior meeting minutes, which were distributed as part of the materials for this board meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the prior meeting minutes?
I'll make a motion. We approve the minutes from January 22nd. Is that correct? 2019?
Thank you. A second from anybody?
Sure, I'll second it.
Great. Is there any discussion or corrections to the minutes?
I actually did have one question on this, and this was the very last comment before we made a motion to approve the recommended budget. And it was a question that I happened to have asked. It was about we were having a discussion about the contribution increases for FPDR 3 under PERS, and that they were going from like 25% up to a projected 38% by 2024, I believe. And Stacy, you made a comment that it includes retirement of the unfunded accrued liability for PERS Tier 1 and 2. And I guess that surprised me. So maybe it's not a correction in the minutes as much as I want to pursue whether that's really would be true, that Tier 3 contributions could include any costs for Tiers 1 and 2. So if we could just investigate that at some point. Okay.
And I can address that question. You want me to do it right now?
Of course, sure.
Sorry, I was trying to read Kathy's hand signals. Stacy Jones, FPDR Finance Manager. This is really awkward, isn't it? So yes, I have an email from Milliman that I'm happy to share with the rest of the board where I just confirmed with them that that is the case. And yes, a portion of the Tier 3 contributions are to pay down the Tier 1 and Tier 2 UAAL. And I guess I shouldn't speculate about why the PERS board made that decision, but you can think about the mechanics of it, and that with a declining Tier 1 and Tier 2 active population, the contribution rate on the still working Tier 1 and Tier 2 employees would be...
It sounds like you're really echoing. I don't know if it's
Yeah,
because
it
Sam's
is.
microphone might be on and next yours, but I'm
Let's
having a
try
hard
that.
time
No,
understanding.
it's still really echoey, isn't it?
Yeah.
What if I'm further away? No, then you can't hear me. What about now? I will just have
Just
to be,
keep going.
I'll have to be immobile for the entire presentation, which is impossible for me. So the contribution rate on the Tier 1 and Tier 2 folks would have to be very large if they were retiring it on their own. And so my best guess is that they made that decision for practical reasons. And then you'd get into, you know, employers wanting to get rid of their active Tier 1 and Tier 2 folks because the contribution rate would be so high, and then that would make the problem even worse, and there would be no end to it. So yes, that is accurate.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. It struck me as kind of odd, and I guess I wonder that I see the logic in that to help smooth the way for plans that have members in Tiers 1 and 2, but for an agency that doesn't have members in Tier 1 and 2,
Yeah.
it just raised a red flag for me. Has that question been asked and answered, that it makes sense that your members who are not even in those plans, that you're paying a portion of the unfunded liability for them?
So I have never raised that question with PERS, but we have raised it internally in the city. I mean, not so much as a, what can we do about this, but as a, boy, it kind of rubs me wrong. That's the context in which I've raised it. But we are part of a rate pool, the SCLRP, the State and Local Government Rate Pool. Thank you, Chair Cooperman, which further complicates matters. You know, when you're in a pool, sometimes you get good end of the deal, sometimes the bad end. So our rates, in addition to being, you know, we're a subpart of the City of Portland, and then the City of Portland is a subpart of this other pool, and it's a pretty complex, I cannot envision that being altered. But it's not a question that I've asked PERS or that I'm aware that the city has asked PERS.
Well, thank you for explaining. And that shows because I'm one of the only 2 non-PERS members here, so why that didn't just jump to me immediately. So
No, it is a really fascinating point, and yeah, not one that has escaped my attention, but yeah.
So hearing no other comments?
I have one. I just want to clarify on page, are these listed in pages? It's under the public session, under the ETOB, equal to or better than test. Stacy, right before, I think it's action 1, second paragraph from the bottom, Stacy, I believe Stacy Jones, stated that the FPDR has not failed or is likely to ever fail an ETOB test, and felt that the ETOB test was not the mechanism for any of the related discussion. I know I seconded the motion to accept them, but I do not remember the words likely to ever fail being stated in the last meeting, because my thought process is on this ETBO test, I don't want it closed. I want it open for discussion. So when people want to come and talk about it, we as a board can talk about what their specific requests are. So if you put likely to ever fail, that kind of draws a conclusion that we don't want to hear anything else. And I do want to hear other things. So, because I don't know what the request is. I haven't been given a request for the ETBO, the equal to or better than test by anybody in specific. And if they come forward, I'd like to hear their request. This kind of shuts out that request.
First, we'd actually have to ask Kathy to go back and double check if I said that, but I probably did, because under the current, so first of all, the most important thing to understand is that we don't conduct the ETOP test, and we don't have anything to do with it, and no one gets to make a request to us about the ETOP test. So there's nothing for the FPDR board to do with the ETOP test. So those requests need to be made to the PERS board. PERS runs the ETOP test, PERS sets the administrative rules. They could alternatively be made to the Oregon legislature, because the Oregon legislature is the one that sets the ETOP statute, and then PERS expands upon that with their administrative rules. So if folks want a change in the way the ETOP test is conducted, or they have a complaint about how the ETOP test is conducted, the forum for that is the PERS board, not the FPDR board. If folks want to hear from our actuaries when they happen to be here, and that did happen in January, because they just happen to also be the PERS actuaries, I think it's perfectly appropriate for the board to ask more questions about how the test is conducted. And it would be up to the board if they wanted to lobby the PERS board or the Oregon legislature to change those rules, but the PERS board is the forum for that. And under existing conditions, I'll say. So under existing statute, existing PERS administrative rules, and existing FPDR plan benefits, it is unlikely that the FPDR plan would ever fail an ETOP test. But we will have another one in 2022.
Right, and I agree. I think that's fair. I just don't remember those words specifically being said. That's why I bring those up. And if they were, and if it's accurate, then please leave it. I just want to, I don't, if I would have heard those words more clearly, I guess I would have maybe asked more questions at that time, because I don't want to discourage anyone that has a request for the board to not come forward. I want all requests to at least come through us, even if it's another avenue. But if we don't know what the request is, we can't send them to an avenue that we don't know, if that makes sense what I'm asking or saying.
And we can certainly have Kathy go back and check and make sure that that is actually what I said. But if it is, that is what I believe, given the conditions that I just stated under existing conditions. But obviously, anyone is welcome to come and give public testimony to the board on any topic, I believe. It doesn't shut that down at all.
And so then the notes today would reflect that we're open to anyone requesting anything from us that we'd be happy to listen to.
That pertains to FPDNR.
That pertains to FPDNR.
Yeah.
Or a concern that they have with FPDNR.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is up to the board.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Okay, let's vote on accepting the minutes from the prior meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Minutes are approved. So next, here's where we introduce the visitors and everybody in the room. So we'll just start with trustees and then go around to Sam and then. So Jason?
Jason Lehman, trustee.
Catherine McLeod, trustee.
Jennifer Cooperman, trustee.
Elizabeth Fouts, trustee.
Brian Hunzucker, trustee.
Sam Hutchison, Bureau Director.
Kimberly Mitchell, FPDR. Stacy Jones, FPDR.
Lauren Donauer, Outside Trust Counsel.
Franco Luchin, City Attorney's Office.
Frank Del Carlo, Fire Liaison to FPDR.
Ty Walters, Fire Retiree. Dave Short, Fire Department Retiree.
Nelson Hall, Attorney at Law.
Olivia Watman, Attorney at Public Safety. Becky Sacco, FPDR.
Oh, back Henry Ripper, retired Board Police. I can read well for that.
We can tell by
Wait,
the
is
voice.
that on? Good.
We know the voice. We don't have to see you.
Well, thank you again for joining us today. Next, we have opportunity for public comment, and there were some sign-up sheets. Anybody sign up for public comment? Nope. Okay, then we're moving on to the first action item on today's agenda, the annual adjustment review. Take it away.
All right, I'm back. Wait, So let's see, is this microphone okay? Do you guys want me to swap it out? It's going to make everyone's...
I'm having a hard time hearing it. I really am. It might
Kevin?
be just me or where I'm sitting, but it's really,
Is there a volume control?
What about this one? Is that better?
I think that's a little better.
A little
Is there a
bit.
volume control for the speakers in the audience? I think that's what the issue is. Okay.
Yeah, it's set up for other council meetings
Yes,
during
there's-
budget hearings.
And so I think we're
Stuck.
kind of, so just, I guess, stop me, trustee Lyman.
If I have
if you-
questions, I'll ask. You know that.
Yes, I know. Be like, stop, wait, what did you say? So again, I'm Stacy Jones, the FPDR Finance Manager, and today I'm here to talk to you about cost of living adjustments for pension beneficiaries on July 1. Typically, pension beneficiaries get a COLA on July 1. It is required for FPDR ones, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the board has typically, in its discretion, awarded a COLA for the FPDR 2 pension beneficiaries. I think you've all been through this process at least once, and some of you have been through it many, many times. So I've tried to keep it a little simple this year and not go into too much historical detail, but if I've oversimplified it, please pause and ask me questions. So first we'll recap what the charter requires for FPDR 1s and what it allows for FPDR 2s. Then we'll go over the FPDR 2 COLA method that we've used for the last 3 years and talk about what that would look like for this year if the board chose that method again. And we'll kind of take a little side path. I want to address some discussion points that the board raised last year about a potential COLA floor or COLA minimum that I don't think would apply this year, but might apply in the future, and just put some information in front of the board to think about for the future. And then hopefully the board will adopt a COLA method for the FPDR 2 pension beneficiaries on July 1. It's kind of the agenda. So just a quick reminder of why a pension plan might have a COLA, although I think you all know why. If you're paying someone the same thing today that you were paying them 30 years ago, you've actually reduced their benefit because they cannot buy as much with their money today as they could 30 years ago. So our median pension benefit of folks who retired in the last 12 months is about $7,000, a little under. And in 30 years, that will be, in today's dollars, about $3,000 a month, assuming 2.75% inflation. So 30 years is, on average, how long we're going to pay retirees. And then in addition to that, we'll pay surviving spouses for another 5 years on average. So that erosion of a fixed amount of money over time is a really important consideration in something as long-lived as a pension benefit. I mean, it's interesting to consider that FPDR will pay the city's sworn employees longer than the police bureau or the fire bureau will pay them. So we are paying folks for a very long time. Not all pension plans have COLAs. They are most common in the defined benefit public pension plans, but then not everyone has one. Where they exist, they are a very valuable benefit to members and a very expensive benefit for a plan. The impact in any one year seems small, both for the plan and for a member, but the compounding and the really long periods of time mean that it really is a critical decision, and it's equally important to view it through the lens of the member, for whom it's very valuable, and through the lens of the financial impact of the plan, for whom it's a very expensive benefit. So it seems small in any one year, but added up over time, has a profound impact. So the FPDR One COLA, moving on to what the charter requires, the FPDR One COLA is explicitly defined in the charter, so there's no decision for the board to make. This slide is just to let you know what will be happening with the FPDR One folks on July 1. This will be another year of sizable increases for the FPDR 1 folks because their pensions are a percent of active duty firefighter or police officer pay, as the case may be, and that gets trued up at the start of every fiscal year, according per the charter. So that happens on July 1. So everyone will get the 3.9% wage COLA that is part of the PFFA and PPA bargaining contracts on July 1. And the FPDR 1 police retirees will also get the 3% raise that all PPA members got last January 1, which is the last of the 3% salary increases in the current PPA contract. So sizable increases for the FPDR 1 folks on July 1, but you'll see that the impact on the budget is small, less than $100,000, and that's because the FPDR 1 pension benefit is relatively small compared to the FPDR 2 benefit, and there are also fewer than 500 FPDR 1 beneficiaries still living. So smaller pool, smaller benefit to have an impact on. Fewer than 500.
500?
It's so echoey. So moving on to what we're here to do today, which is to talk about the FPDR2 COLA. Oh, and I did want to mention that all of the costs associated with the FPDR One COLA were included in the budget that you all approved in January. So for the FPDR2 COLA, the board, this is just a quick refresher on your discretion. I've excerpted the actual charter language so you can read it for yourself. The board can award anything up to the maximum rate that PERS gives its sworn employees, which is 2%. And the board can award that COLA at any time during the year, but the board has traditionally chosen to award it on July 1 for the same timing, I presume, as the FPDR One beneficiaries is the reason for that, I assume. So that is kind of the bumpers you have to operate within. Historically, what the board has done is to use the same methodology as PERS. As far back as we can find record of, that is what the FPDR board has done. However, as you might recall, the PERS methodology changed multiple times between 2013 and 2015 in response to legislative changes and then in response to an Oregon Supreme Court decision that partially revoked some of those changes. So there were a few years of tumult, and when the dust settled in late 2015, PERS had its method that it is now using and has been using since that time, which is which involves 3 different COLA rates. On the percent of service before October 2013, PERS members get the old PERS COLA method, which is usually, but not always, 2%. And then for the percent of the benefit that's attributable to service after October 2013, they get 1.25% on a benefit amount under $60,000 and 0.15% on a benefit amount above $60,000. So that is the PERS methodology and has been their methodology since 2015. So for our July 1, 2016 COLA, the board at that time really analyzed the PERS methodology, decided that it wanted to maintain that connection to the PERS methodology, but did not care for the 0.15% being applied to benefit amounts over $60,000. So for the last 3 years, the FPDR board has chosen to use the PERS methodology with that one tweak, and that we apply the 1.25% to the whole benefit amount attributable to service after October 2013. There's no differential amount for higher benefits. So that is the method that the board has used. We kept calling that modified PERS, but I think we dropped that last year, and now we're just calling it the FPDR2 COLA methodology. So that is what the board has done for the last 3 years. Oops, too far. If the board wants to use that method again this year, on July 1, 2019, this is what it would look like. The costs for fiscal year 1920 would be about $2 million. This was built into the budget. We assumed this method would be used with the budget that you approved in January. It's also been assumed in the valuation going forward that this method would be used. So $2 million is built in, and it is, it's pretty similar to the cost from last year. Looking on the member side, the average percentage increase for beneficiaries would be 1.99%, and that's because the vast majority of folks are still getting that 2%, because the vast majority of our pension beneficiaries have all of their service prior to 2013. So that really drives the average up. But if you want to look at the range of increases, the range is 1.75% to 2%, and I have a little bit more about the distribution of that on the next slide. And I know that some people like to think in terms of dollar impacts rather than percentage impacts. So the median dollar increase for all of our for retirees, would be a $120 increase with their July 1 benefit. For other beneficiaries, which is surviving spouses and alternate payees whose benefits are smaller than retirees, that would be $31. And then the range is from a minimum of $4 increase to a maximum of $289 increase, obviously depending on both the percent and the size of the benefit. Kind of gives you hopefully a sense of impact to members and impact to the fund of using that method for next year. Are there any questions before I go on? Okay. I think everyone kind of remembers this method, and we've used it for 3 years now. So I did want to take a small detour because this issue was raised last year by two members of the board when we talked about the COLA last year, was the potential of the board in the future adopting a minimum COLA or a COLA floor, because the nature of this methodology means that the cost of living adjustment does decline for each year's crop of retirees over time. So I wanted to show you first what it looks like now, the distribution, what's the worst it could look like in the future, and then we'll take a look at what it would look like over the next 5 or 6 years. So right now, with our current retirees on July 1, 2019, you see that nobody's getting less than 1.75%, and we have a very small number of folks getting less than 1.85%. And those 9 folks getting less than 1.85% are not what I guess we would call traditional retirees. They don't have 25, they have fewer than 20 years of service, so they're kind of, they're falling into the less traditional, they're not necessarily career Portland Police or career Portland Fire. So that's what the current pool of retirees looks like. This COLA methodology does have a floor sort of built into it, because our last person in the FPDR 2 plan came in the door on December 31st, 2006, because the plan closed on January 1st, 2007. So if we look at that retiree, that person who started on that day, and assume that he retired 30 years from now, which is when we stop counting service years, he would get a 1.42% COLA. So that kind of gives you a sense of that's the smallest COLA that.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Did you say if you put in a full 30?
Yes. If he only put in 25, if he put in less than 30, it would be higher. So if he put in 25 years, it would be 1.45%. So I was kind of trying to make it as bad as I could. If you put in the full 30 and he started on December 31st, 2006, then it's 1.42%. Now, the only way in which I didn't make it as bad as it could be is if that person had a bunch of unpaid time between when they got hired and 2013. I mean, now we're getting into unique situations, but in that unique situation, it could be lower than 1.42%. But barring that situation, that 1.42% is the floor that just exists naturally with this method. And what does it look like over the next 5 years for a traditional retiree, which I've just, retired folks, pretend retired them, with 25 years of service on June 30th of this current fiscal year, and then taken that out for 5 years. And you can see how the COLA declines over those 5 years. For someone this year, that COLA would be 1.83%. For someone out in 2024, that COLA would be 1.68%. And it goes down from there until you finally bottom out at that 1.42%. Actually, you bottom out at 1.45% with somebody with 25 years of service. So I don't believe that this conversation has a bearing on today's COLA decision, but the board members did ask about what that might look like in the future if the board was interested in a minimum COLA. And I think, there are things for the board to start considering and thinking about now and over the next several years, which is the majority of the board interested in a minimum COLA? If so, what would that COLA percent be? If 1.42 is not high enough, what would be high enough? The next questions would be kind of policy considerations, and there may be legal questions involved in other policy considerations, such as, is this for retirees only? Is this for all beneficiaries? Is it in high inflation years only? What kind of other parameters might the board want to put around a minimum COLA are some of the things that the board would have to think about. The most important of which being what the floor might be, because that will impact timing. Since this is an annual decision the board makes every year, if the board was interested in a 1.5% COLA, we can kind of keep our eye on when we might need to have, or 1.5% floor, we can keep our eye on when that might come into play versus a 1.6% floor or whatever the board might be considering. So I wanted to bring that information back to the board so you can think about timing and ask me any other questions that you might want me to come back with next year, and we can kind of do this as an iterative process if the board wants to continue to explore the idea of a potential COLA in the future. So that's kind of a two-slide offshoot to answer some of those questions.
Hello.
There you go.
Sorry, I moved, but I could not hear. As I look at this, I'm just wondering, are people going to have to really start looking at this and deciding, should I leave this year? Because if I leave next year, my COLA is going to be lower, and at some point, I'm going to be losing money because you look at something, if your percentage of COLA is higher today than it would be tomorrow, then at some point, if you live forever, that number is going to surpass the other one. So are we going to deal with people starting to think about, I'm just going to leave because if I stay another year, my COLA is going to be less, which is going to reduce my pension for the rest of my life? Or do we have people are going to have to start thinking about this? Should they be thinking about it right now, or should we find a number that's consistent, everybody knows, and then you just move on? Or is everybody going to be doing a math equation till their head explodes, trying to figure out when to leave?
This is a really good question, Trustee Lyman, and I love math equations that we can do until our head explodes, so which means, of course, we've already done them. So we have retirees at workshops that we're going over. It's unusual to have a feature of a pension benefit that gets worse the longer you work. And that is exactly what this is. So we do call that out for members, but the difference is very incremental. So we've done it over 5 years and over 10 years. So because of the increase in final pay and the increase in years of service, which are increasing your pension, those just far outstrip the decrease in the pension, even when we do a net present value calculation. Now, if you had somebody who was saying, should I retire 15 years from now or today? Very few people are making that decision. But if somebody was making that decision, then I'm not 100% sure what the answer would be. For somebody saying, I'm trying to decide between retiring this year and 2 years from now, the difference in COLA is going to be, in most cases, like say 1.85 to 1.83. It's not enough to offset the bigger increases from additional final pay and, in most cases, additional years of service, right, unless they've hit their 30. But even with just the increases in final pay from the cost of living adjustment.
And is that something, when somebody comes in for an estimate, you can explain
Yes.
to them? Because I'm one of those people that's going to be, half of my time is going to be with the 2%, and the other half, or whatever percentage, whatever I make it to, is going to be a lower number. So every day that I work, my COLA is going to be less.
Yes.
But because of like you said, the years of service will increase the other end. So, but will you be able to explain that to the people
Yes.
that are coming in for estimates?
So we do call that out very specifically as one of our, top 3 or 4 assumptions, and we tell them, all right, if you retire on this date, this is what your COLA would be. If you retire on this date, this is what your COLA would be, with the caveat that the board could change that methodology at any point. But given this methodology, so we call that out on every single pension estimate, and our pension coordinator explains it to folks, and I explain it at the workshops. I couldn't swear to the degree to which folks understand that. And the real way to think about a COLA is over a very long period of time. So that requires a net present value analysis of us saying to somebody, okay, over the course of your life, your pension, you will get this much more money out of us because you waited an extra year and your pension got higher, even though your COLA is less. We don't tend to go into that much detail with folks. I think we lose people at that point. But we've done that analysis over relatively short periods of time for ourselves.
Okay.
But we do call out the different COLA for folks.
Thank you.
I'm going to jump in on this just because I agree with what you're saying, that the present value calculations, just that the additional years of service and potential higher compensation you would assume by continued service are going to weigh out. But I guess I would also think of it differently. That extra, the only thing that's, you're not actually getting, I think, a lower COLA for any of those individual years you're working. Is just simply if you express that COLA as a percentage of your total benefit, it's decreasing over time. But let's just consider a situation where someone has 10 years prior to 2013 and 10 years or 15 years after 2013. Well, the 10 years before 2013 are still going to get the up to 2%, and the 10 years that you're certainly going to, that you've already worked after 2013 are going to get hypothetically 1.25%. None of that is changing. So the decision to work an extra year or 5 years or 10 years is only saying that you're going to get the 1.25% on those additional years of service. It's not actually changing the COLA and the benefit you've already earned for those prior years. The only thing that looks like you're reducing is that your average COLA per year of service, the longer you work, goes down. because you just have more years after 2013. So the lower rate on average looks like you're losing money, but you're never actually losing money. Your COLA is going to be 2% pre-October 2013 and 1.25% presumably post-October 2013, and that is never going to change for any service you've already worked. So I actually think that while everything Stacy said is true, it's actually really never, ever going down. It's just if you have more years post-October 2013, it looks like your aggregate rate is going down. So no loss of benefits.
Well, and here we can get, this can get kind of obscure. And we and PERS had long conversations about exactly how to do this. So I do want to make sure the board understands that we are taking the final, we take the blended COLA, and I can show it to you guys in Excel if you, it is, we are not taking, we're not saying, all right, this is the portion of the benefit that was earned in these 10 years and applying 2% to that, and then taking this is the portion of the benefit that was earned post-2013 and applying 1.25% to that. We do a calculation to come up with a blended COLA amount.
You
so
actually do that.
Actually
Okay.
is lower, and then apply that percent to the entire benefit.
So I stand corrected. So
So
then it does default back to what you were saying about the present value calculations,
Yes.
Remy. And is that blended COLA being applied to all the service benefit? Is that
Yes.
spelled out in procedure?
Yes,
So-
yes. And so we try to make that clear to members, and I think that part folks understand. And we do that because that's what PERS does as well. PERS, I know, briefly considered doing something more actuarially based, trying to figure out, okay, this portion of the benefit really is attributable to this service time, because of course a member's earning less money then, and that benefit would be of lower value in general. And in the end, with their admin roles, they said this is going to be too complex, and they just did this blended percent.
So thank you for clarifying. I said corrected. Thanks.
But it is fun to think about the math, isn't it, in all the different ways. But as fun as it is, we just want to make it clear to retirees what the trade-offs are. But the trade-off for any retiree in the window that most retirees are looking at, which is kind of trying to decide when to retire within the next 3 to 5 years, it's not having, the small negative benefit is offset by the increases in final pay. And for those who have not hit 30 years, the increases in the years of service part of the calculation is really swamping that effect.
I had one more question.
Yes, of course.
And this would be for our OPSERP members, because we always seem to, we don't decide their benefit adjustment, but they are still our members. And so could you explain to me how that formula works with in relation to the $60,000? Now, is that, because they're giving 2% based on the time before, is that a certain amount of money? And where do they get the $60,000 from when they're using the cap of the maximum of $60,000 getting 1.25? Is it above what their service before 2013, the $60,000 above that, or is it if they made $60,000?
I'm sitting here trying to decide whether I should say what I'm pretty sure is true. Probably not. I should probably go back and double check exactly how PERS does that calculation, rather than saying how I think they do that calculation. So let me
The reason I bring that up is because
back in May.
our members who are OPSERP, especially the ones that are being hired right now, they're obviously going to be having a retirement 30 years from now. It's going to be more than $60,000, and how that is figured in so they can plan for their future too. Because they're going to come and ask me, and I'm not going to be able to answer it. So.
No, and so that, that's, under the purview of the PERS board, but I will bring that back to the board in May so that you folks can understand exactly how that calculation works, especially for Trustee Lyman and Trustee Hunziker, who may have folks asking them about that. And one of the concerns that the board had when we settled on this method in 2016 was that $60,000 is not indexed to inflation. So that it's just sitting there, and eventually almost everyone will have a benefit over $60,000 in PERS.
Thank you.
Stacy, how long has it been 60,000?
Since, oh boy, now I have to try to remember. So this was part of the series of changes that happened between 2013 and 2015. But this final method that is really the outcome of the Morrow decision at the Oregon Supreme Court that came out in 2015 is when I would say this provision, this method really finally went into effect, so since 2015. So we haven't had a lot of time yet, and it's entirely possible the legislature will revisit that. Then again, we can all think of 25 examples of things that are set in statute that the legislature has never revisited. For example, the DRO fee that we're allowed to charge folks when we do a divorce division for a pension is now much, much more than we're allowed to charge in statute. So it's not uncommon for the legislature to not revisit an amount if they don't index it to inflation.
You've been doing this for a while, not holding you to anything that you say. What is your best guess? I think it just came out of the air.
My best guess, on
the
how they
60,000.
came up with that
Yeah.
60,000?
I'm not holding you to it, and I know you'll do your research, but you have, I think, I think you have knowledge of a possibility. What would be a possibility?
You can tell you're a police officer. All of a sudden, I feel like a spotlight is on me. Come on, you know.
Don't
No.
have to answer that.
She's a lawyer. And then Trustee Fouts is my attorney right now. No, not really.
The only reason I ask is I remember this conversation. I think we had it last year and the year
Yeah.
before. And
Yeah.
if I remember, I think it's just a number that came up. I think somebody in the legislature just came up with a number. I could be wrong on that, but that was my understanding on the 60,000. I don't remember any magical equation.
So I really tried to find out the answer to this question because I was deeply curious. So let me say, truthfully, I do not know.
Yeah,
I've heard two different rumors. We've talked about them before, so now we're into like rumor mongering. I mean, one is that $60,000 felt right to legislators.
That's what I remember in our conversations in past meetings. That's that conversation come up that we could never really find.
Kind of put our finger on that, and I think having worked in the state legislature, I mean that's possible. So that's one possibility. But as Trustee McLeod mentioned, they may have been trying to hit a particular savings, a particular reduction in the unfunded liability, and that number may have made the math work. There are a lot of different reasons that they might have come up with it. I think what the FPDR board hit on was, well, whatever their reasons were, that number doesn't really work for us, for our population. And it's worth pointing out that, PERS is looking at folks across the whole state. Most of our retirees live in the Portland area, which has higher cost of living. PERS folks are much more likely to be career government officials, so they're less likely for this to be their only form of retirement savings than our pool of folks. And there were a variety of, also our Portland Police and Fire don't participate in Social Security, whereas PERS retirees do. Those were some of the concerns that folks raised at saying, this is an area in which we feel it's really justifiable to diverge from what PERS is doing, is my memory of the board's conversation. Any other questions? All right, so now we get to drum roll. Staff recommendation. No, this is not a very exciting conclusion. But I would recommend to the board that we continue with the FPDR 2 COLA method. I think the board put a lot of thought and analysis into adopting this method for the beginning in July 1, 2016, and really no information has emerged since then that would, I think, warrant a need for the board to revisit this methodology. I think that there is value in maintaining consistency for both the retirees and the fund. We hear from retirees that it's nice for them to be able to count on a COLA percent. And with this method, although everybody can have a different COLA, it is the same every year for you as an individual. So they know, all right, I got 1.9%, and now I'm going to get 1.9% next year. And it is valuable for the fund in terms of our funding to be able to maintain that stable approach as well. So for all, and using this method does maintain the board's historic link to using the PERS methodology with the one tweak that we felt, was really merited for our different population. So for all those reasons, I would recommend that the board continue this approach, but obviously it is up to the board. Are there other questions?
I have one question, and I'm assuming the answer, but you might as well tell me. You mentioned that the FPDR One increases were contemplated in the most recent levy analysis in the budget that was prepared. Are the 2%/1.25%, were those also included in the projections?
Yes, and so we did give direction to Milliman to, they have to assume something, and so they've assumed that based on the last 3 years. Yes, and also for the budget, we've assumed this method for the budget as well. Right now, this method is is very close to 2% because so many folks are getting the 2%.
And I want to thank you and compliment you for the information, all the averages and dollars and the analysis about what the high and low possibly could be, because that was of concern to me last time we talked about this, and it's very helpful to see kind of what the floor might be for members potentially affected by this in the future. So that's very helpful.
Thank you.
I second that. I really appreciate that. That helps when we have questions or concerns. They always want to know what's the absolute worst thing ever that could happen to us ever, right? And so that's nice to have that. So I'm glad you took that extra step.
Oh, yeah, well, thank you. And we appreciate having a board that is thinking about how this will look a long time from now, and really thinking forward a lot, which is a great thing to have. Thank you.
Any other discussion or questions?
Well, I'd just like to say, and I think I'm going to go with the recommendation as in the past, but I do want everybody to remember and think about, so I'm working next to people who, if I retire a year before them, I'm going to get a better COLA than them. And sometimes it doesn't sit right. I don't understand why our system is set up like that. I understand PERS did it for a cost-saving measure. We're bound by kind of what PERS does on some level. But I don't think we have to do this. I think we could come to something that was a stable number through more discussion. So I just would like to keep the option open, to keep thinking about it and decide if there's another way of doing this. I think as we look at our actuarial valuations, our fund is doing pretty good. I mean, we are spending a lot of money. I mean, it's a very expensive plan, but our beneficiaries, they really appreciate it, and it's going to be good for the members, good for the citizens, and while it does save money having a COLA like this, it doesn't really help the members much. It takes benefits away from the members. So we got to think about that too for the future. So I just would like to keep the conversation going next year. If anybody wants to talk about it again, it doesn't mean that we're done talking about it. So thank you.
And another thing, Trustee Lyman, I think if the board is interested in a COLA floor or just a set COLA of some kind, it would probably be a good idea to ask Milliman in their 2020 or 2022 valuation to run those numbers for us. And that would be the right way to say, all right, if we set a floor of 1.5 or or whatever the board is thinking of, what would be the differential cost? Because that would be the right way to think about, I could tell you the cost for 5 years, but we should really think about and that'll allow the board to weigh cost versus benefit to the members. And so that might be something to think about in 2020 or 2022.
Yeah, I agree, but in that same context, we got to think about what it cost before this. Before we put this into play, it was more expensive, but it was still the benefit. It wasn't, we just reduced the benefit. So to bring the benefit back somewhere closer to where it was, you can look at that as a cost, but you're kind of forgetting where it all started. So I understand what you're saying. And the status quo is the budget or whatever we're doing right now, but we can't forget the history of how we got here. And while PERS has this formula, I think technically the first year that this came out, we could have said we're going to give 2% to every dollar, because that's within our small little line of what we have to do as a board is not give a percentage higher than what PERS gives. And we've already said that we have the ability to give 2%. So we could give 2% on every dollar. We're not doing that because we're trying to be fiscally responsible. But I don't think we thought through all of this and the number going down at that time. So I just want to keep the conversation going. I appreciate all the work you've done on this, and your knowledge in this area is awesome. Thank you.
So Stacy and Sam, if we wanted to set a minimum or, can you hear me? Okay. If we wanted to set a minimum or to set some set COLA going forward, would we need to change the plan, and what would be the procedure to do that?
Nope, the board could do that, and this is an annual decision. The charter gives the board discretion to make this decision every year. So any year that you decide, all right, we want a 1.6% floor, and this year we would have folks who would fall under that 1.6% floor. So this year, that is our decision. There is no way to bind future boards because it's an annual decision, but while you are the board, you could make that decision in any given year.
But it's still a year-to-year decision.
It's an annual decision, yeah.
Okay.
Could you do me a favor, and next year during your presentation on this, remind us of that specific detail.
That it's
So I
an
think
annual decision?
That is, so that way we know that our decisions can be based, because as we maybe mature out of here and other members come in or trustees come in and things like that, I think that's a good reminder that as a board, I would hope that they are considering, listen, this is actually getting down to a point where it's probably not acceptable. What other options do we have? So I would like that to be maybe part of your report for next year, like, hey, listen, here's our report, this is our my recommendation, which is you're doing a fine job. Keep in mind, you also have this decision that you could make.
So you just want to keep this discussion of a floor part of the presentation and discussion on a yearly basis? Yes.
That the board has the discretion to do that. We don't, I mean,
Yes.
because otherwise we could, if we're same trustees or different trustees, some of us could be thinking, well, it would be way too much and outside of our scope to change that, when in all actuality, what you just said is, it's not that far out of our scope, and it
No.
is something that we have control.
It is, and if I had new trustees on the board this year, I would spend a little bit more time talking about what the board's discretion is. I know you've all heard it before, but yeah, the board has discretion to give anywhere from 0% to 2%. And that is the official opinion of the city attorney's office from a few years ago, because there are PERS retirees getting 2% right now. As our actuaries have pointed out to us, it does, if the board were to give 2%, it does require, we have to make sure there's a living PERS retiree getting 2%, which right now there are plenty of them. In the future, there may not be. We cannot give more than the highest rate PERS is giving. And at some point, PERS will no longer be giving anyone 2%. That point's a long time in the future. So if the board went with 2%, it requires some vigilance around that. On the other hand, if the board said we're not giving a cost of living adjustment at all, well, then we might run into ETOP problems. That would be a change in circumstance. So if you just look at the charter, that's kind of the band of discretion, is 0 to 2%, but there are some things the board would want to think about before they went to either end of those two extremes. Yeah.
You said something in there that I want to make sure I understand. That no FPDR retiree can have an increase, tier 2, can have an increase greater than PERS tier 2. And is that including the $60,000 breakpoint?
Yes. So
Over
there
time, that is going to be more of
Yes.
an issue.
Yes. So right now, plenty of PERS retirees getting 2%, because all you have to do to get 2% have been retired before October of 2013. But if we're looking way, really far out into the future, yes.
Yeah, so that is a good long time, but the $60,000 threshold will impact things eventually.
And the $60,000 threshold only applies to service after 2013.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. So at some point, though, there will be something.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Let's hope for long-lived PERS 2 retirees.
Yes, Matt Larrabee was joking that we'd have to identify the youngest person or the youngest 10 and get put them on our watch list with our death audit service. And it's like, well, Matt, let's not go that far quite yet. But.
I'm going to ask a question about, I'm not endorsing going to 2% for everyone, just acknowledging that some of us are realizing that maybe that's something on the table here as we watch this gradual decline over time. Would you just explore with Milliman what the additional cost would be for them to analyze? And just might as well go to the top and just say, what if everybody had a 2%?
Yes.
And because that way, just like we know the lower bound on COLA increases for any tier 2 FPDR is 1.42%, let's find out what the upper bound might be if they just went back to 2% across the board. So just the cost for them to add that to the valuation, not
I think
it.
the cost would be fairly minimal because we did have them do this as part of their evaluation with the 2016 data. Yes, that must be right. When the board was originally kind of deciding what's the best approach, and at that time we asked all right, what would the cost be? How much would the liability change if we did this, modified PERS method we were calling it, versus if everybody just got 2% versus if everybody got 1.25%, I believe are the three scenarios we had them run. So it's pretty minimal cost because they're just running different COLAs through their software. And I think definitely we could ask them to do in 2020 or 2022 or whenever the board feels is the right moment, we could do a 2%, and that would say, well, this is what the cost would have been if nothing had changed. wouldn't be exactly quite right, but close enough, because not everybody gets 2% every year, but close enough for this purpose. And then we could look at the modified at this method that the board has been using for the last 3 years, and we could look at something lower than that as well.
Okay, and it may be just even going back and looking at that earlier analysis will give us enough of a sense of that. So, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments or discussion? We have a question from the audience.
I apologize, I did not plan to make a statement.
How about Dave? We'll push the little button so you got a green light. Appreciate it.
But I would like to make a comment about the reality of the 2% COLA. I was hired in December 23rd of 1966. I retired in September of 1993, and I proceeded to get 2% every year. Well, when you retire, you have to pay your own medical care. So for 14 years, I did not get a raise with a 2% COLA. In my 15th year, if you add it up, I turned 65, I got a $12 a year raise on a 2% COLA. That's the reality of it. And that is the reality for the people who are coming and going to retire in the future. So I think I advocate the 2% every year. It's not a large sum according to the money people, and it may help people get to that point. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I remember discussion from past trustees and things like that, and just when we were asking questions about after this, we're not bound by the 1.25. We're not bound by anything like that. That was just a board decision back in 13 or 16 when they started this.
Well, so again, I mean, the board in charter can give anything between 0 and 2%, but I think we do need to think about equal to or better than testing. You know, if we were to go with something significantly lower than what PERS is doing.
But 2% would not be lower than what
No,
PERS is doing.
no, 2% would not be lower than what PERS is doing. Then I think there are other considerations, but they're not related to the equal to or better than test. Then the considerations are, you know, kind of that question of making sure that we have a living, retiree who's still getting 2%.
I missed the first part of that sentence on the echo. What'd you say one more time?
So with the 2%, the considerations are cost and making sure that we have a living PERS retiree who's getting 2%, are the two things that most immediately jump to mind if we went to 2%. If we went below what PERS is doing, then we may have an equal to or better than issue. I don't know how much room we have there, like how much lower we could go without running into ETOP trouble. So if you just look at the charter, yes, you got authority from 0 to 2%. But do bear those other things in mind, equal to or better than test if you want to go under what PERS is doing, and we'd want to do some analysis around that, I think, if the board wanted to go in that direction. It doesn't sound like the board does, but if they did. And if the board wanted to go in a higher direction, then I would say we would want to be looking at a cost analysis from Milliman to make sure we understand the impact on the liability, and then just make sure the board is aware that we will have to maintain vigilance around making sure that there's a PERS retiree getting that 2%. And it would be a break from the board's past practice, a pretty significant break from what has occurred in the past, which is to do what PERS does.
So and that'll bring up my next question, because I know our legal counsel is here for the board. Past practice is a word that is used in litigation all the time, right? So what sort of legality problems are we having with the word past practice on breaking from the norm and giving everybody 2%?
I'll take that. So,
And Lauren, if you feel that we need executive session for any reason, don't hesitate to.
no, I mean, this is, the board legal counsel has taken this position in the past, and
Get a little closer to the microphone.
you bet.
Thank you.
The charter language says that the trustees have discretion. And discretion means you're not hemmed in by what you've done in the past. And we've been consistent on that back when this was discussed back in 13. So, sometimes past practice can dictate what the benefit is. In this case, the charter's clear, it's discretionary.
So there'd be legal counsel, and you are the legal representative for the city for us to kind of monitor and
I'm technically the legal counsel for the board, not the city.
Okay. Very good. Well,
Can I ask a technical question relating to this COLA? So just, if suppose we went, we've gone for 3 or 4 years at 1.25%, and it were increased this year and maybe next year, and then goes back to 1.25%. Practically speaking, is that locked in for calendar years? So you've got somebody retiring in 2020, and it's been 1.25, it's 2% for certain years, 1.25 higher, and then maybe back to 1.25. Is it locked in by calendar year when you're determining this average, or is it only what the rate is in effect at the time the person retires?
It is not locked in for the member because the board can change it next year. So right now, if anybody retiring right now, say they get a 1.9% COLA under this method, next year, if the board changed its mind and said we want to give everybody 2%, then that person would get 2% next year. And then if the year after that, the board said it's 1.25, then they would get 1.25. So there is no complete certainty for a retiree.
But I think you were asking a calculation question.
Yeah, I am asking a calculation
So is it an average of each year's individual COLA, or is what they get the COLA as of the last year that they retire? Do you measure the COLA for each individual year and take the average over the term of their work career? Or is it like the assumed rate at PERS, where it's whatever the then current, I don't want to mix up PERS, whatever the then current COLA is the year that they leave? Or is it the average of all the COLAs that they lived through to get to that retirement date?
No, it is calculated when the person retires, and it's specific to that person. I might be missing.
So let me just, so let's suppose, and we're not advocating this, but just suppose that this year we say 2%, and next year we say 2%.
Yep.
So for 2000, effective July 1, 19, 2%, effective July 1, 2020, 2%, but it's been 1.25% for some years before then, 5 years. And then it goes back to 1.5% for several years. Someone retires in 2025. Is their COLA calculated as 2% on all the years of service up to 2013, and then 1.25s and 2s and 1.5s? How is that done?
No, it would be whatever the current COLA policy was that the board had adopted that year. Am I still not getting it?
Still not, no.
Okay, so for active, the decision you're making right now has no impact on anybody who is not yet retired, and it will have no impact on anybody who retires after July 2nd of 2019.
Correct, but when someone tells you that they're retiring and you're calculating their pension payment and they've had a 20-year work history, do you look at each independent 20 years at the,
No.
what mathematically walk us through?
Yeah, let me just pull up for you guys. I think this might be easier for the folks who kind of want to see the actual calculation in Excel. So we take.
Can you show it on the screen? Oh, yeah.
Oh, Kathy is turning this on. Okay. So let's ignore this. Can everyone see on the screen this 1.63%?
Yeah.
So this is an example of somebody who's retiring pretty far out, who's retiring out in the future, June 30th, 2020. This is not a good example because I was sort of playing around here with, so here's our lowest point person, our 1.42% person.
The wording is cutting off.
Oh, the wording is cutting off. Okay, so this, so let me show you what we do is we go over here and we say, over here we calculate, okay, how much service time did this person have? They had 30 years of service. What % of that service occurred prior to October 8th of 2013? In this case, 22.57%. Then we go over here and we calculate 22.57% times 2%. The screen is locked because we don't want people messing with our templates. we multiply that 22.57% times 2%, and we multiply the 88% times 1.25%, come up with a blended COLA of 1.42%. And so that has no concern or care for what COLAs ever were before that moment. I'm still not 100% sure I'm understanding the question.
I think you've answered it. In other words, that for any active employee, not yet retired, at the time they retire, the secondary COLA percent that they're going to get, not the 2%, but applied after October 2013, is going to be whatever the board has then approved for that year.
So the board
year of retirement. And that would be applied to the percentage of their total pension benefit service or benefit that applied after 2013.
And it is within the board's discretion to ignore the 2013 thing entirely.
Right, I'm just saying,
Right.
under the current rules, it wouldn't matter for any active employee not yet retired, it wouldn't matter what the history was of the COLA increases post-2013 benefit. They could be up to 2%, down to 1.25%, down to 0. It wouldn't affect them. It would only be what's in effect at the time.
Yes.
So they're covered by what is in effect at the moment that they retire, regardless of what the COLA was for the years prior.
Yes. Okay. And they're only covered, and that only matters for that 1 year, because then the next year the board could make a totally different decision.
Right.
Yes. So what happened before what has happened before is irrelevant for those folks.
So if we're colleagues and we retire within a year of each other, and at the time that I retire, the COLA is 1.25. Okay. But the year that you retire, the COLA is 2. She's retiring at the 2% COLA for that year. And when I retired, it was at 1.25.
But now you're going to get 2, just like she is.
For the next year, I will.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Because these are sequential one-year decisions that we make.
Yes, they're sequential, independent one-year decisions. And so what happened in the prior year is completely irrelevant for how we do this. The board could change every year, and everybody who's retired as of July 1 that year is going to get what the board tells us to do. Now, right now, the board has adopted a method that results in a differential COLA for some folks, but in any given year, the board could direct us to do something totally different, and everyone who's retired by July 1 that year will get that percent, irrespective of what happened in the past.
Thank you for explaining that. I would never have guessed, so thank you.
Sorry it took me so long to get there.
And I'd just like to say, there's one we had talked about earlier, if we granted a 2% or some floor number, and then we possibly could run into 60,000 later. If we created a floor of whatever it is, we could send something to the city for a charter change to remove the language that says it's tied to PERS and have our own language, whatever we wanted it to be. That's how you would get around the 60,000, right? You would remove that language from the charter and put in some new language that fits our group.
Well, then you've just changed the ball game if you just want to change the charter. Yeah. So
that's what I mean. But if you were worried about making a floor and then worrying about when they're not going to give 2% anymore or whatever number it is, because if PERS put something in the legislature this year that said we're not going to give any COLA anymore, then our language would stop us from giving a COLA. Am I not correct?
But remember, if PERS changed their formula, you at your discretion the next year go, we're going to throw out the PERS formula. We're not going to mimic it anymore. We're going to go our own path. Right. We do have to watch the cap for the 2% is what we're saying. And I think maybe that's what you're worried is the cap is going to decline. But we elect to follow the formula that we have here. Every year, at some point, if PERS does some oddball things, you can throw out, we don't want to match PERS anymore. We can come up with our own formula. We just
can't
have
give
to
more than what PERS gives, though. That's the
well, but
we can't give. We couldn't say, oh, COLA or cost of living was 15% like in the 80s, 70s.
It's the longest living person, and I will tell you, there's people getting that are going to get 2% for COLA for probably the next 30 or 40 years from PERS. That keeps our cap at 2%.
I understand that. I'm just saying if we wanted to remove ourselves from the PERS thing, it would have to be a charter change to get rid of that.
If you wanted to change the cap, yes, you're right.
Okay, and that's what I was saying. Okay.
That's the only thing.
So the language that we're concerned about, I just wanted to put it back up on the screen, is where it says, the board shall do this in its discretion, except the percentage rate of change shall not exceed the percentage rate. So it would be You know, if the board was hopeful to have a complete divorce from this PERS limitation, you would want that sentence to end after discretion, period.
Yeah.
And that would require council to refer a charter change to the voters.
And I'm not advocating to do that. I'm just saying that's how you fix that problem of the 60,000.
Yeah, either that or
and
I
the
call
2%.
Either that, or I call PERS every day. No. They really don't want me to do that, but yeah.
Do we have public comment?
Oh, Crystal.
I just had a couple of questions. So I'm a little confused.
Could you introduce yourself?
I'm Crystal Buchel of the Police Liaison.
Thank you.
It seemed like not that many years ago, although it was probably maybe 3 years ago, when Trustee Bob Foch asked for a 2% cost of living raise. And now we're stuck, it seems like, on a 1.9%. Is that because of PERS was only 1.9, or, because I think the ceiling's 2%. So I would ask, and was it 3 years ago that Bob asked for the 2%?
He might have, I do remember that discussion coming up. I think what the board had adopted was what we used to call, and are now just calling the FPDR method, but was the modified PERS method to mimic. The board wanted to continue to mirror what PERS was doing. And so at this point, it comes up with about 1.9 for some people, but it can vary, again, depending upon some issues or on the calculations. But that was the choice made by the board, was to mirror PERS. That's why they just chose not to stick with just a flat 2%.
Yeah. So it is, just to say again, it is within the board's discretion to go up to 2%. That is within the board's discretion. It's not what the board has chosen to do for the last 3 years. They've chosen to use this calculation method that right now is, for folks retiring right now, is probably in the 1.9% zone, but the board has discretion to go up to 2%. But that's just not the method the board has used for the last 3 years. So that's why the current context of the discussion is around what the board has done since the PERS board changed its COLA method. But it's still within the board's discretion to go to 2%, as it's within their discretion to go to something less.
And is it also within the board's discretion to ask for a 2% cost of living, or to approve a 2% cost of living with a floor added on to that, or is it just one or the other?
Well, what would the floor be if it was 2%?
Well, I don't know. I'm just looking at the table where it said, you know, it can go down to 1.42. Is that just depending on what the initial cost of living is?
So 2% is the maximum the board can give.
Sure.
So in that case, there is no need for a floor. If the board is giving 2%, then they're already doing the most. I mean, then they're giving retirees the most that they have the current legal authority to give them.
Okay.
So at that point, there is no need for a floor. The floor conversation is around, like I said, for every kind of group of retirees going forward, the COLA gets lower, and the board was concerned that, well, maybe there's a point at which this is too low. And what is that point? You know, I mean, I don't know what that point is, but we might want to say, yes, we want to do this method, except we don't want anyone to get less than 1.5, or we don't want anyone to get less than 1.75, or we don't want it, or whatever it is. But so we want to continue to do what PERS does, which is the historic practice, and use this method, but maybe we want to put a floor underneath it. But it is within the board's discretion to do the most it can do, which is to give 2%.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And to throw a wrench in there, if equal to or better than is true, then couldn't we be better than?
Couldn't you be better than? Well, if it weren't for this charter language, maybe.
No, I won't open that conversation. So, I don't know. I think there's some serious thought that should be considered at the fact that we have a economy that's growing at 3.2% in 1 year and 3.9% in the next, and 2% is not anywhere close to that. The 1.65 or 68 that we gave last year, I can't remember the exact amount, plus a 1 point, what was the recommendation this year? I missed it. What was your recommendation this year on the blended?
So the blended is specific to every individual. So the vast majority of folks we'll go back to that slide that shows what folks would get. So, you know, almost everybody would get 2%, And then a couple of hundred folks would get less than 2%, ranging from 1.85 to 1.99%.
And I think in times where you have strong economy, you don't want to go crazy spending all the money or the exceeds and things like that. And I think we do a very good job of being responsible with our accounting. I think we're very responsible as a board. I think we're responsible as a city. I don't think it's a ridiculous thought to 150, 260 people all getting a 2% raise. I don't think that's ridiculous. I think it's a very minimal cost. I think we, legally, we stand in good standing with that. I like the blended rate. I think it's very nice. I like the fact that we have a bottom line, but I think we should give some serious thought. I mean, we've got 7.2% pay raise or cost of living in the last 2 years, right? So I don't think it's that far out of the question to consider 200 people getting a 2% pay raise this year. Just a thought.
Is that just a thought, or are you making a motion?
I'd like to make a motion that we go 2% flat across the board.
I'd like to make a recommendation. If you're not going by a recommendation, you give us a new recommendation to investigate, and we come back in May with all the numbers and all the impacts with it. It's not that we're putting it down, but there's a financial impact that we haven't studied here, and we want to come up and give you the full financial impact of it. I'll give you some history. Why are we doing the COLA in March when it doesn't have to go to July? Because we've often taken 2 meetings to go to it. So this gives us a chance to come in May. It gives us plenty of time with a decision to get them out in July. But my recommendation is, if you're coming up with a different approach than we've used, tell us specifically what you think it is or the scenario you want us to investigate. We'll come back with the costs and present it to you so you have the full view of what a 2% would be or any other issues. And then we will also try to look at, are there any other impacts besides financial that should be considered by the board when you do that?
What was that last statement you just made?
Well, part of it is if you're coming in here, we want to present anything with what not only the potential financial impact, but are there any other impacts that have to be looked at? It's just to explain the full ramification of what it is.
Are there any other ripple effects of any kind that we haven't discussed here?
Yeah.
And the board may want, we may want an executive session just to touch base with council on the break with past. As Lauren said, the board has discretion. Nevertheless, it's a break with past practice. So that's been going on for decades and decades.
I understand that, but our legal counsel said that past practice is not an issue. So I understand what you're saying, and I think thoroughness is good, but to get more information, I think that is great, to get cost analysis and fiduciary responsibility. But as far as we're a board, right? We're 5 intelligent people, and we're not breaking from anything in our attorney.
Yeah, Brian, this is not meant to be negative for it, but I think part of, you said the fiduciary is you're voting, you want to seriously look at a plan that costs more than what we presented. It is our responsibility to present you with the cost of that plan so you can understand what you're voting on and what the financial impact, big or small, that it would have on the fund. So I'm just saying if you have this option or another one, let us know what it is. We will cost them out and present them to you. You have the right to come back to this option or the right to do any other option, but I think you need to know all the financial details that go with the option.
As fiduciaries, we need the budget impact.
I would agree with that.
To vote.
Yes, I think that's a good idea.
So,
well, I would ask, do you consider what you've presented to us today costed out?
what I presented to you today costed out for the FPDR 2 COLA method.
Yeah.
The cost in any 1 year is not going to be dramatically different with the 2%.
I just mean, so if you were to present it at 2%, how would this presentation look? There's no total at the end as far as what it's going to cost, or?
What slide number is this?
Yeah, what slide number is that? There should be slide numbers. Oh, it's slide 6.
It's a $2.09 million impact if we follow the recommendation that was presented to us with the blended rate of the pre-2013 service at 2% and the post-2013 service at 1.25. The average is 1.99. I think what I'm hearing is a direction from the board to the staff to go back and present to us what the cost impacts would be for a 2% across the board COLA this year for all retirees. And it would be most helpful, I think, if you could present this slide with 2 columns on the right-hand side.
Yes.
So the initial proposal on the first column, and then a 2% across the board next to it, so we can see what the delta is between the two.
And I would like to withdraw my motion for now. It's for the moving of it forward to the 2% until we get that information. I think that'd be a nice slide to see.
Yeah, and that is certainly easy to do. Is there anything else that the board would want to see? Is it just the 2% and the FPDR 2?
That we had a significant amount of discussion on the next slide, again, not numbered, but no, keep on going. If we could see that one also.
Well, and that one, if the board wants to do 2%, then it's 2% for, I mean, if the.
Sorry, yeah.
If
Not
that's,
thinking.
yeah,
Right.
I mean, if that was the decision of future boards.
Okay.
Then it would be 2%, going out into the future.
So yeah, just then the prior slide, because this slide, everybody would be in the 2% bucket, and we just want to see the financial impact on the slide before.
Right. And the financial impact, again, like the financial impact right now, the difference, the delta, is not large.
Right.
I mean, we're talking about giving a couple hundred people a few more percentage points. The impacts are in the long run.
Right.
Because, again, compounding and this being a very long-term thing. And so I do encourage the board, it's a bit awkward because you're making an annual decision and you can't bind future boards. And yet the COLA decision is best considered in a very long-term, from a really long-term lens. And so I encourage folks to think about that. If the board wanted to do 2% every year, the cost this year is minimal. The cost over the life of the plan is almost certainly large. And so it's a bit awkward to make an annual decision. It's kind of like being a politician. You're making a short, you're looking at things through a very short-term lens, but it's a very long-term impact.
So Stacy, just to help me with this, if I were in this plan and I retired today and, or say we decide on 2% and I retire July 2nd, my COLA would be 2% for my entire retirement? Or is it still decided year by year while I'm retired?
Decided year by year while you're retired.
Okay.
It's a series of independent one-year decisions
Yes.
that each board makes for that year.
That impacts all the current retirees
Yep.
as well as those who are retiring in the coming fiscal year.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
Okay.
Existing retirees
Existing
as well
re-
as then.
Yeah,
then
existing retirees as well as everyone who retires between now and July 1.
Okay.
You have to be retired on July 1 to get the COLA.
So I guess based
The COLA
on
that you are all
that,
deciding right now.
when you talk about the compounding effect of this decision, it's a little hard for me to understand.
Right.
Because we aren't binding.
And this is
future.
where we get into the question of setting out on a path, right, that can be changed. And so, well, is the board setting out on a path, or is the board saying we're doing this one year and next year we're going to do something different, and next year we're going to do something different, and next year we're going to do something different? Or I think it's one thing to say the board is setting out on a path of doing something, of giving 2%, which I think it'll be very hard to turn around from that path. If the board is setting out on that path, then there are big cost impacts associated with that.
Hold on, before you go too much further, I don't believe that's what I'm hearing. So I think what I'm hearing is we like the idea of looking at year to year. I'm fully, and I know I'm fully understanding that next year will be a different year, right?
We have to do year to year.
Absolutely. And so I don't view it as a 30-year projection. I'm not trying to view it from a small lens because we have a responsibility to protect our retirees that are going to retire in 15 years, right? To make sure this fund is available for them. So I don't believe that we're looking at it like that. I look at it in a small lens, I guess, sort of form, in the fact that over the last 2 years, last year we had an amazing growth, 3.2%, but we still went with the blended amount, which was half of what the CPI was, because we have a responsibility. We've had 2 significant years of that, and we're not going to the 3.9, one we can't, but I think this is something that we should look at, and I think we're doing a good idea, and I don't foresee board ever looking at it for 10 years, going 2% every year. I don't think that's what we're doing. That's why I wanted to make sure that past practice was not going to come into an issue. This could be something that, hey, listen, we've had 2 good, strong years of growth. A little extra bump on this year is not a bad idea, is my thought.
And we can bring that back in May. We can look at the cost impacts. We can hear a little bit about, we need to hear from the city attorney's office. Lauren is the trust counsel, but we need to also hear from the city attorney's office around some legal considerations, and we can bring that back in May.
If you're going to do that, just to give us some sort of image of the difference in long-term costs, I hear Brian's points, well taken. That's, we do have discretion every year, but by the same token, next year we would have to ask ourselves, well, what's different? Next year, looking back, what's different this year than last year that would cause us to want to go lower potentially? So we do need to be mindful of that. And I think the prior research you're talking about, or analysis back in 2016, was looked at to say, what if we stayed at 2%? What if we went with this modified basis? If there were anything else, I don't want to ask someone to do work now on a potential floor that's higher than 1.25%, but in that analysis, if anything was done, say at 1.5 or 1.75, anything like that, if it's in there, just because another alternative to consider would be, for longer term would be, rather than thinking about, do we want to renew at 2% every year, and what kind of precedent does that seem to set? Maybe the concept of a higher floor than 1.25 or a higher blended floor.
So certainly what we can do is bring back, kind of the short term, the 1 year impact of the 2% versus the FPDR 2 method. We can bring back Milliman's analysis that was done before. Things have changed a little bit, but it'll still give the board a sense of scale of saying this was the additional cost of doing 2% versus the FPDR 2 method versus, which I can't remember the third scenario that they considered, so we can bring that back in May. And then if the city attorney's office has, additional legal considerations, the board can hear those, and we can have an executive session if we need to around that, and then the board can take another look in May. Is that sounding like what the board would like to do?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Is there anything else that the board would like to see?
Well, I'd just like to say, so we're talking a lot about the impact on the fund. We keep hearing that. We've got to remember the other side of the equation too, the impact on the employee, the retiree, and how their pension is going to, and what it will actually do for the employee as an individual. I mean, you could say this is going to be really, really, really expensive over the years, but it's going to be very, very minor for the actual individual. So, and that's how it works, right? But let's not just focus on the gloom and doom of what it's going to do to the fund, but look at the positive it's going to do for the members too. So I don't want a huge analysis of it, but I don't want to leave that portion out of
Sorry, Trustee Lehman. Is there anything that's not on, because what I plan to do is update this slide, as Chair Cooperman suggested, so that we have one column that's exactly as it is now, and then the second column shows the 2%. Is there anything that's not on this slide that you would want to see in terms of?
Well, I assume that the third one's going to say 2%, and so we know that. So if we're just going to keep this slide, that's fine. But if we're coming back with a whole bunch of analysis and what it's going to do to the fund, and you could bring that actuary. I don't know if you're going to hire an actuary to do this as far as what it'll do to the liability. I assume it's not going to be a whole heck of a lot, but unless you push it out into some 90th percentile, but.
We'll just bring back the analysis Milliman already did. I think that'll give.
Did they do it on 2%?
Yes, they definitely did it on 2%, and this method, this FPDR 2 methodology. I believe they did a third thing, which I can't remember right now. Does anybody, Sam, do you remember?
I don't remember. It was the 2016, not this last one, but the one before. We had the three
you think about
charts.
So you're going to be using numbers that are old, where the economy and the real market value has gone up. That aren't. It's not going to be true. And
it'll give you a feel for what the comparison back in 2016 was between a 2% and our present one.
The scale of the difference won't have changed, and real market value doesn't have anything to do with the liability calculation. That's only for the tax levy side. So we would just be looking at the change in the liability, because whenever you're making any kind of cost decision for a pension plan, you should not look at the 1 year impact. I mean, the way to look at cost impacts in a pension plan is over the life of the plan.
Okay.
And this is a bit awkward because you're making an annual decision. So, I mean, I want to acknowledge that this is a little bit weird. You're making an annual decision, and yet if you're doing financial analysis on a pension plan, you don't talk about things over 1 year, you talk about them over the life of the plan. And so I think it makes sense to bring this slide back, which mostly talks about impacts to members, shows how much more money members are going to get, and what so and I'm not quite sure how else to talk about the impact to members, but I'm open to that if there are other ways. And one thing we could do is look at the difference in purchasing power reduction under this method for, like, it's a little tricky because you got to pick somebody. Since the FPDR2 method, the percentage changes for each individual employee. But we could take someone with a 1.75% COLA, say, and somebody with a 2% COLA and show the difference in purchasing power erosion over the long run.
If it's not too much.
No,
work.
hey, and I'm here to do work for you guys, so if you guys want me to do it, I'll do it. Actually, that's a lie, I won't do it. Someone on my staff will do that. And we can show the change. That, I think if we're gonna look over the long run at the fiscal impacts, as I'm thinking out loud, for the plan, then that allows us to look at the long range impact to a member at the same time. Sound right to folks? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes?
Could I make just a few brief comments?
Could you introduce yourself, please? Go ahead.
Really quick.
Okay, Ty Walters, retired from Portland Fire and Rescue. Just to put a little bit of this in historical perspective, when the PERS limit maximum was 2%, there was no minimum, and there was some fluctuation from year to year if the cost of living was below 2%. PERS also, I don't believe this any longer exists, but it also had there was a catch-up provision. In other words, the idea was maximum of 2%, every so often the legislature could enact an ad hoc increase to catch people up. Okay, I believe that's gone. Am I correct, Sam? Okay, but that was in place. The other thing I was going to mention is that the reduction from, at the 60,000 level at 2% maximum under PERS, and then the 1.25 and the 0.15. This was due, of course, to a fiscal crisis involving the long-term health of the PERS plan. And that's something that didn't really exist with our plan. However, I think in an effort to be fiscally responsible, one of the prior boards concluded that if they're doing this on the PERS level, we should make some sort of adjustment here. And the idea, I think, was that most PERS retirees retired under $60,000. Significantly higher here would have a significant effect on more people if the PERS formula was applied. So, we've deviated from the PERS formula to suggest that by going to 2% would be some big deal. I mean, you're already not following the PERS formula. So I can't imagine what the legal ramifications would be. But in any case, I don't see what the big issue would be if you were to decide to go to 2%, other than the long-term, projections of what I agree would need to be done to see what the impact is, if any, on the viability of our plan going forward over a number of years. But anyway, that's all.
Thank you. We're going to do our fiduciary duty and evaluate the information that you're going to come back to us with in May.
Yes, so in May, I'll be back for tax anticipation notes and some additional information on the 2% versus this method, the three things that we just talked about. I'll update slide 6.
Okay.
I'll bring back the Milliman analysis to give a sense of the scale of the long-term liability impact, and I'll show purchasing power erosion for a member over a full retirement of say 1.75, I'm just going to pick that, and 2%. So that can give the board a sense of long-term impacts on both sides. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So moving on, we have some informational items on the agenda.
Oh, I'm still next. Oh, shoot, hold on, I left my binder back at my chair. So I just wanted to update the board. This may be more a point of curiosity, but we are having 2 back-to-back 27 pay date months right now. I'm sure Trustee Lyman and Trustee Hunziker know this, in February and March. So we just wanted to update the board on retirements so far. So our best guess right now for how many folks we're going to retire in February and March is 54, 36 police and 18 fire. So we have 35 folks who have already retired, 12 who have appointments between now and the end of March to retire, and 7 more who are on our list but haven't made appointments yet. So some of those may decide not to retire, but then we'll have some folks who kind of just show up and decide to retire that we've never even heard from before. So that is how it's looking for retirements in February and March. It's kind of fascinating. We budgeted for 53, so for once, those actuarial assumptions have turned out to be somewhat right. Police is still overrepresented because we have twice as many police retirees as fire retirees, and police is not twice as large, nor do they have twice as many eligible as fire. So still overrepresented in police, but a healthy number from both bureaus. Just thought the board might be interested in that. And then we have the board expenditure report, which is through January because February had not closed when we sent this out. And I really tried to think of something interesting to point out to you that I had not already pointed out to you, and I couldn't come up with anything. I really did spend like 20 minutes, but there's nothing of note on there that I haven't already pointed out to you at previous board meetings, but I'm always happy to answer questions.
No specific questions? You've pointed everything out of note to us.
Yes, I have.
Thank you.
Unless something new and exciting happens, something new and exciting will probably happen before the next meeting, maybe.
Okay, the next one, FPDR, the legislative review. As you know, this is a long session that started, I think, in January 22. I may be off a day or two, and we'll go through, scheduled through at the end of June of this year. When we go through, have any legislative session, I track a lot of bills. Anything that could possibly have an impact on FPDR is my interest, and I read all the bills, believe it or not, and I'll provide some general comments back to our legislative, our government relations area on what we think of the bills. So you have a handout here that came on a separate email than with the board book, and I'll just go high level as to what my thinking is if you want to dive deeper. I'll also make some personal comments on the directions I think legislature is going, but I will forewarn you, as everybody knows, the legislature can take a 180-degree turn tomorrow, so they're not that, at times not that predictable, but I'm going to try to do some predictions. So the first thing I look at FPDR funding. Is there anything in here that's going to impact our ability to levy taxes? That's our bread and butter here. If we can't do that, we have a problem. This year, there are quite a few bills out there that are basically attacking Measure 50, which is the property tax limitation, and all the intent of those bills is to expand the pot to which that can be taxed, so there will be more property taxes, income coming in. So we never have a problem with levying the amount that we need, but if the pool shrinks, there's a tremendous amount of compression, which impacts the city and a whole lot of other government entities and puts a little bit of just a little political pressure on us. But if the pot gets bigger, the compression tends to go away and nobody looks at us and points fingers that FPDR is getting more money than they should be out of the pot. The issue this year with the legislature is though there are quite a few different ways to try to attack the plan, like every time a building or house is sold, you're going to raise the assessed value to match the sale price. Maybe all commercial properties are assessed at market value instead of the assessment formula that was put in Measure 50. So again, all different ways to increase the amount of taxable property out there. The legislature and the governor, this is not a high priority this year. It does not look like these bills are going to move forward. The governor and the legislature are looking at increasing business taxes. And I think that's the route they're putting all their time in at the legislature, is increase business taxes. There are a lot of discussions with very business organizations, how they can, whether it's a sales tax or a revenue tax or anything like that. So that's the direction that they're going, and I think they're banking on having some success in increasing business taxes this year. So property taxes have not come to the top. But again, qualify that could change literally at the last week of the legislature. So I'm comfortable this year there's nothing that's going to impact our funding going forward. Then I look at anything that's going to impact the actual benefits going out to our FPDR One and FPDR Two retirees. In the past, there's been a couple bills. One is the tax remedy, which is actually increases the benefit people have gotten in the past to offset some of the state taxes that were assessed on their pension income. And then alternate payee, which is basically a divorced spouse, how we have to pay benefits to them and increase their benefits. This year, there are actually no bills in this area. There was one or two that similar to this, but they only are written to PERS. So I'm watching to make sure nobody slips in a little amendment to try to apply it to FPDR. But again, there's nothing this year affecting the FPDR 1 or FPDR 2 benefits. The next block I look at is we have to put our PERS employers hat, because a big chunk, you saw the budget, a big part of our pie chart of our costs are paying the city's PERS contributions for firefighters and police officers. So we're always very much aware of the multitude of PERS bills that are out there. Most of them are minor and really don't have to do anything, but you're getting that block of bills that are trying to make significant changes to the PERS program. The ones that are out there this year are a rehash of the ones that have been presented the last 2 or 3 legislatures, some of them a little bit more creative than the past. It's like creating a 4th tier so new hires go into a 401k. Somebody's presented a bill that would go out and not abolish PERS, but close it so all new hires are not part of PERS and there is no PERS program going forward for them. That would be a financial disaster, but I'll save that another time if it gets any traction, which it won't, and then we'll get Stacy up and explain the reason why. There's different ways of limiting the PERS benefit. There's just a lot of them out there, and can not spend time because these are getting no traction. It's a Democratic Congress, and I don't think there are Democratic House and Senate. They have the supermajority, so I don't think this is going anywhere. I will put a caveat in this. If they want the business taxes to go through, business may want something to touch PERS, because they don't want their increased business taxes turned right around and hit the PERS thing. If you want to go to schools, to more teachers and smaller class sizes, then make my money there. I don't want our increased taxes to go in and just pay the unfunded liability in PERS. So something may come up as part of that little grand bargain that may or may not happen with the legislature this year. And we probably will not know that until the latter part of May. That's when I think this whole grand bargain thing will come together. So we'll just have to sit and watch. Workers' compensation, again, we are not part of workers' compensation, but we do monitor the workers' compensation bills closely because there's trends and ideas that people have that we want to follow, but then there's also a chance that every so often they write us into a bill that says it impacts us. So this is the PTSD presumption, which is no longer called that anymore, but it's I'm just going to call it the trauma and stress presumption. I've been sending you all emails with links to all sorts of documents over the various different sides that are pro and con for this. Where this bill is right now is primarily with the management labor advisory. That's the word I'm looking for. And management labor advisory committee. I've been there, and I've noted in the emails to you, testified. It's more been clarification what FPDR is about and what it could impact. And the last time I was there, so I recommended I do want one specific, some of the wording changed because of that provision that goes out to us is written so broadly. It inadvertently is potentially telling us we have to administer a lot of our claims per the entire workers' compensation statute. That's not the intent. So they've just got to narrow some of the wording down with it. So that's been put on the table just so we do that. Today they had a hearing. I was in Salem, the Senate on Senate Bill 507, so it's the Senate version of this bill. Quite a bit of discussion and a presentation of why the bill is needed, and then there are some indications of the issues with the actual wording of the bill. And again, The links to the documents I have sent to you before lay out the detail from both the for and against. It's in the, predominantly MLAC has got to make the decision. Legislature most of the time does not move on a workers' compensation bill until MLAC gives a thumbs up on it, and they're still looking at it. They've got 10 days in which they've got to make a decision to move this forward, and it's a tight time frame. I don't know. There's a lot of people are liking the intent of the bill, but there's still some serious issues with how the bill is worded and put together. And I'm not certain if that's going to get overcome this legislature with it. Any questions on that one? Because I know I sent you the emails out on that at this point. Nelson's not here. He's the one I think who is drafted, that did most, or if not all, the drafting of the bill.
Who was with you at that hearing?
I did not. I was just an observer at the hearing. I did not testify at the hearing. You had multiple representatives from the unions and some of the fire.
Not today, the one before.
Which
I heard
one?
the testimony. You were talking.
Well, I've gone to the MLAC committee.
Okay.
I've done that.
Who was the female voice that was with you? You sent us the audio of you testifying to the board.
If that would have been people asking me questions. I was not with anybody at the council. I went solo at that. I went stag at that meeting.
To that? Oh, the audio that you sent to us, I listened to.
Send me the, but there was nobody at the table. I was a solo person at the table. The only people that I was interacting were some of the people, were the MLAC committee at the table were asking questions.
And this is the one, make sure I'm on the same page. This is the one where you were saying that you understand and that you requested for this board or whoever your advisory, whoever you're talking to bring in a professional psychiatrist or someone in the profession that could give you information.
That wasn't me. That was the SAFE representative who is the one that suggested bringing in that. He said, you've heard from the attorneys, you've heard from the lobbyists, now it's time to hear from the actual medical people.
I'll listen to the audio again.
Yeah, just see if it is, because he
I swear it was your voice.
He had two women with him, so that was it. But that was the SAFE team doing that.
So you haven't testified down there at all?
At MLAC, the first time I did, which is back in December, was just a quick overview of my understanding what the bill was before it was even written, because we had not seen the bill in writing at that time, but some of the thoughts. The second time they had asked, because the first time they had some questions about FPDR, what we are, because they knew that we were different. They sent me away with some homework, and I came back and presented, here's our statistics on our stress claims, which I included the copy of that document to the emails I sent you. I explained how we manage claims, how we went forward. So it was all information about how FPDR did things, and they did ask me questions about how I thought this bill might impact FPDR.
And that was on the audio that you sent us, right?
Yes. So that would have been the one in the second one, and then there was the third one, which is where I spent solely on, hey, look, we need to change this wording in Part 7D of the
I was referring, the one that you audio sent us.
Because I sent you audios for all three meetings.
Okay. I'll listen to them again.
Yeah, listen to me, tell me, and we'll walk through. But I remember that specific comment being made by the SAFE representative.
Okay.
Okay. Also, after workers' compensation, I put my hat on as the FPDR director, and this is thinking that I also do when I look at the PERS employer. How are PERS changes going to impact my ability to retain my people and retain and attract people in FPDR? And I'm very much aware of how this impacts the Fire and Police Bureau for their ability to retain and hire new people if you start monkeying with PERS or changing PERS and do some of the draconian cuts that are projected to it. So when you're an employer, you have to look at it. One is you're paying the bill, and the other one is you got to keep employees on board. And I specifically look, hey, look, I've got 60% of my staff could retire. So if somebody starts messing around with PERS, I would expect these people to do their math and calculation and see is it worth bailing now than staying longer with it. And then it's just you keep your ear out for any other thing that's working through with this. Part of my thing here is I need to protect the fund. I want to protect the benefits that we can offer. I'm very much attuned to how this is going to impact our members. I want to keep monitoring that as we go through. So that's why I'm looking for it. And I watch this like a hawk and read all these bills with it.
And by
And-
protect, you mean that if there's something that were to come from legislature that would enhance the benefits for the members, that's also protection, right?
Well, that, you could argue that the workers' compensation presumption is enhancing a benefit for the member. I mean,
Right.
they
I
are.
just want to make sure that we're under the same, that
Yes, I look at
you've got two
when I
hats to
say
wear on that.
impact, I
Yeah.
don't mean negative, solely negative. I mean negative and positive. I'm very much aware. Unfortunately, rarely do these bills have a positive impact on our membership.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that, I know you always are changing hats and you do a very good job
But
of
it
it,
is,
so.
but I am looking out for the plan, I'm looking out for our members. That's why, most of my thing is I want to make sure nothing's taken away from our members.
Yes, exactly.
And nothing
That's what I appreciate.
impacts our ability to do this.
Good.
I don't think I've ever really, with maybe the argument for this presumption, that there's been nothing positive or adds anything to any of our members. And that's just not how the legislature has been working lately. And again, there could be some radical change. Legislature moves fast, so there can be a bill just sitting here, nothing, and then boom, it moves. And I have to respond as fast as possible. So I always keep what I'm considering the Bureau and the members' interest and the plan's interest in front as I make decisions. And I'll give you an example of how fast things can move in the legislature. It has nothing to do with us, but it was the, now I can't even remember the bill. Oh, the rent protection. That went through between the last board meeting, it was doing nothing, to this board meeting, it has now been signed into law. So it went through committee hearings, voted on one house, went through more committee hearings, voted on the other house, and signed by the governor in less than 2 months, in probably 6 weeks. So that's how things fast, and so I'm very much paying attention to this stuff, and we'll be prepared if something spins. This hearing that was today was only put on the calendar 2 days ago. So I respond, and I'll be down to Salem at least to listen to these things, at least the workers' compensation presumption bill, just because I'm very interested in it, trying to balance the benefit that's trying to give the members with the ability to try to manage a program with that bill, how it's written. So that's what we have there. So if no questions on that. If you have any questions about some legislation you heard about, give me a call or an email, and I'll walk you through what my analysis or thinking of that bill is for you. So just real quick on an FPDR update, the the Bureau Management, the FPDR Management are beginning to put together what we want to call some continuing ed classes for you, and I will give you the 3 topics that we're working on. One is to give you an overview of the charter and the administrative rules. I know that some of the new ones we tried to go through it, but it's pretty quick and fast, but this one we can now take a step back and look at that now that you got a little bit under your belt, and just walk you through the charter, how it's put together, as well as administrative rules. Then we'll have one for the life of a disability claim, so we'll follow you through the life of a claim, what we do, how we approach and manage that claim. And then we're also going to talk, and you just got a tad flavor of the spreadsheet that was up there that Stacy gave you, is pension estimates and pension calculations. A little bit more, probably pretty similar to what the kind of presentation we give to the retirees during the retirement section. So you can begin to see those. And these are just continuing ed. They'll be voluntary. We'll put together the agenda, and then we also have to be careful about how we manage the quorum situation. If 3 or more of you want to go through it at the same time, we'll have to make sure that it doesn't come out as a public meeting. So we'll have all that ironed out when we send these out to you. So we're hoping we can at least in the next month or 2 start giving you options to come in and go through a couple of these continuing ed classes.
Thank you.
And last one, a future meeting agenda. So May 28th, our next one, I'm going to have to change this because we have the tax anticipation notes Stacy told you about. We'll have the follow-up on the adjustment discussion we have, with the intent that the board will have a motion at that time. We will talk a little bit about public meetings. I've updated the board handbook to talk about what constitutes a public meeting, just to let you know that. That goes back to the quorum issue and what can be said when and how by a board. And then July 23rd, we have no agenda items at this point. And so we'll just keep that meeting on the schedule and just see what happens if we need to have a July meeting or not. And we'll make that decision probably 2 to 3 weeks minimum before it's scheduled.
And I'll remind people that May 28th, the date of the next board meeting, is the day after the 3-day Memorial Day weekend. So if you're anticipating taking time off and extending your vacation, let us know so we can determine if we have a quorum.
And if I heard you correct, I just want to make sure it was clarified. And I'll call them educational classes
Yeah.
or update classes for us as a board. What was your anticipation on those?
We're just now starting to put together some of the curriculum agenda. We'll get an email, hopefully at least in a month, we'll have at least one of them available, and then we'll share it with you and try to see what's the best way to get you in and to do it. I think the idea, having all 5 of you once makes it like a classroom. It's like almost like we'd like to hold it in smaller groups so it can be much more interpersonal and discussion with that. But that's the kind of information that we'll send out with you, and they'll be available anytime, or we'll be willing to go with somebody one-on-one if you can't make it, or we can set a class time if you want to make it there.
I really appreciate you bringing that up and to speak with the other board members. I think that's long overdue for me. I mean, I think we've all gotten our feet wet, been here a little while, and I actually am excited about that because I think all 5 of us want to do the best that we can. And I think by having that education, we can actually be a board that is an active board rather than a reactive board. I've said that before. I want to make sure that we're always moving in the way that we should with today, not just what we've always done in the past. So thank you for that. And I think it would be great to go at, obviously I know we have the quorum issue and stuff like that, but as minimum a pair. We'll
look at this quorum thing. I mean,
thank you for setting that up. I guess
so we just don't. I don't want to get in trouble and have to have a public meeting training session, but that potentially is something that we might have to have. If you have any ideas of things else you would like us to add to this list, just email me and we'll add it as we develop the others. But these are the 3 basics I think we need to go with. I think I'd be interested to do the disability claim and see how the pension estimates and actual final pension calculations are done for people.
Thank you.
Okay.
We've finished our agenda. Appreciate everybody being here this afternoon, and our meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.